Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this short 30-minute session. And I want to talk about job crafting specifically and how you can implement it in your own workplace and what some of the advantages are around that. So I'm going to take you through a process, give you a couple of examples of job crafting, and give you a little bit of a train track to run on. So if you're trying to implement job crafting in your workplace, I'll give you a way of doing that. Now, at the end of this session, I'll give you a copy of the slides and the recording, so you'll get a full set of slides and recording for this. And of course, if you're new to job crafting, I'll explain exactly what job crafting is all about. So we'll go to our slides and just give you a little sense of who I am, because some of you probably don't know who I am. Tim Baker, as you can see, I am an author. I've written 13 books, and one of the books that I'm going to talk about today, of course, is Breaking the Proactive Paradox, which I'll explain very shortly to you. And this information that I'm sharing with you comes from that book. You can see that I also am a keynote speaker. I also run workshops and play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. And we only play every second week because at my age, that it takes 2 weeks to recover. So that's a bit about me. So let's launch into the topic today and have a little look at what we're going to be covering. The first thing I'd say is that probably it's not so much an objection, but people may be thinking to themselves, you know, can job crafting actually increase performance? Because that's an important question. Otherwise, why would we go about doing it? What would be the purpose of doing it if it's not going to help increase in performance? Well, we're finding from studies that it does increase performance, and there's some good reasons for that. I think if people are able to have a little bit more skin in the game in terms of how they basically plan and organize their work, they have a little bit more commitment to building on their own innate talents and strengths, and a little bit more opportunity to be able to concentrate on some of the things that they really are good at in their workplace. And by definition, that will increase performance. So there's no doubt about it. If it's done well, you will find that people's job performance will increase unquestionably. Now, what we're going to be covering in this short session together is that we're going to look at the proactive paradox, which I mentioned in the title of my book, latest book. And then, of course, we're going to talk about job crafting. And there is a correlation between the proactive paradox and job crafting. And I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation. So, paradoxes. What's a paradox? And often we use this word quite a lot. You hear the word paradox. And I guess the best way to describe this is to think about a chicken and the egg. So which comes first? Does the chicken come first, or does the egg come first? That's a paradox. And of course, we can't answer that directly because they both relate to each other. So this paradox that I'm going to talk about is very much a process of what comes first. Is it the employee showing independent judgment and being proactive, or is it the manager encouraging them to do so? And so I'm going to share with you and explain what that paradox actually looks like right now. So you can see on your screen there, the proactive paradox is a fairly simple process. It's a complicated in how it actually plays out, but to explain it to you is quite simple. So at the first step, in most cases, a leader wants their employees to show prudent initiative. I'm sure you want that to be the case. You want employees not to come knocking on your door, so to speak, every time they've got a decision to make. You would like them to be able to make decisions, back themselves. And I mention the word prudent because you obviously want to be kept informed, and there are some decisions, of course, that people have got to run by you. Now, that's true of most leaders that I know of. And then, of course, if you look at employees, they also want to show initiative. if you talk to most employees, one of their biggest complaints is that they don't feel that they can actually use their autonomy in the work that they do. So basically, the manager and the employees, or team member and team leader, whichever way you want to call it, are basically on the same page at the outset. So when you take over a new team, you inherit a new team, you probably want that team to be showing independent judgment, and those people in the team also want to demonstrate that. So what happens is, you as the leader, very eager to get people to be showing their independent judgment, you invite that initiative. You actually ask people in a team meeting if they will show their initiative, that you want them to do that. Now, the employees who are sitting in that meeting probably are in the back of their mind thinking, I'm not sure whether my leader really means that. And because they're a little skeptical about whether you really mean that or not, they decide to sit on their hands. In other words, they don't instantly show independent judgment because they want to see some evidence from you that you really mean what you say, that you're going to back up your rhetoric. So they don't do anything in that stage. And then what happens is the leader gets frustrated because he or she has made an announcement and he or she notices that people actually are not jumping forward and basically showing independent judgment and autonomy. And because people aren't doing that, the leader thinks to themselves, well, you know what? I'm going to have to jump in and fill the void. So the leader jumps in and does the work that he or she is expecting the team members to do. And while the leader's doing that, the team members are watching the leader getting involved in these things, and they think to themselves, I was right. My leader did not really want me to show independent judgment, because if they did, they wouldn't be getting involved in those tasks and activities, you see. So this is where the paradox comes in. So the leader wants people to show initiative, and people are waiting to see confirmation that that in fact is the case. And so all that this ends up doing is creating frustration, not just for the leader, but also, interesting enough, for the team members. And that's that's what I call the proactive paradox. Now, of course, there are 3 steps or 3 stages in that paradox, and I just wanted to run through those with you. The first stage of the paradox is there's agreement. So there's agreement from the leader that people should be showing autonomy in their work, and there's agreement from the team members as in wanting to show autonomy. So basically everybody's on the same page. However, the employee team member wants to see evidence that the manager really means what they say. And so the employee is a little cautious in the early stages and just is waiting and watching. And of course, as soon as the employee jumps in and fills the void, then it creates a confirmation in the team members' minds that my manager is not really serious about me showing independent judgment. So that's the initiative paradox. That's the proactive paradox. And of course, I talk about that quite readily in my book. Here's an example. Let's now talk about job crafting, because job crafting is a concept where the employee actually makes a decision about where they're going to spend their time, and they have a little bit more opportunity to and scope to craft their job to suit their purposes, either to build on their strengths, to give expression to their preferences, or because of their circumstances. So let's have a look at Paul, and this is a very good example of job crafting. So let me read this out so you can get a good handle on what is occurring here. Paul works in IT in customer support. He spends most of his time on the helpline, but has a passion for testing and improving new software. Through discussion with his manager, Paul joins a group that tests new applications before they're launched in the company. This took up about 3 hours every month. Now, while Paul's role didn't substantially change through job crafting, in other words, he was still very much involved in the customer support role, even though it didn't change substantially, he was delighted that his skill and passion for analysis of new applications was being recognised. So you can see that Paul has taken some steps to reshape his job somewhat. And it's important to recognise that there are core responsibilities he's still got to get done. But because he's got himself involved in what he really enjoys doing, which is testing and improving new software, he's actually been able to craft his job. That ultimately might lead to Paul working in that area, you see. So that's an example of job crafting. So basically, there are 3 different ways that you and I can job craft. Now, whether you're a leader or whether you're a team member, you've got 3 opportunities to job craft, or 3 dimensions. The most common one is the task crafting. Task crafting is where you decide either to, eliminate tasks, increase tasks, or modify tasks. So from your perspective, it might be that, as in Paul's case, you might take on other tasks. Other people may be better off eliminating some tasks with the, having discussed this with their team leader. So that's task crafting. Now, that's the most obvious form of task crafting, or the most obvious form of job crafting, because you can actually see it happening or not happening. But there's 2 other types of crafting. One is cognitive crafting. Now, cognitive crafting is where the person doing a job actually has a new perspective on what their work actually entails. So instead of seeing the task, they actually see the outcome. So people who can cognitively craft have a new insight into what their job might entail. So, for example, a policy officer in a government department is basically charged with the responsibility of writing policy papers. Now, that's a task that they have to do, but they may also see that as an opportunity of bettering their society and doing things that might improve basically the community that they work in. So by looking at it that way, it'll obviously give them a bit more of a spring in their step in terms of what they do. Relational crafting is actually where people craft the relationships, because obviously we don't work in isolation. So when people are working together in the workplace, there are some relationships that are neglected. There are some that are working really well. There are others that are sort of mediocre. But with relational crafting, the job holder actually starts to develop or build new working relationships with a variety of different people. Why? Well, it could be so that they can get their job done more effectively. So, and I'll give you some examples of that. So essentially, you've got 3 perspectives. Now, when someone job crafts, it may well be that it covers more than one of those 3 different dimensions. But it's possible that any of them can be engaged in job crafting. Let's have a look at Harry. Now, Harry is a good example of somebody who is using cognitive crafting and task crafting, and perhaps even relational crafting all in one go. So let me read through that so you can get a sense of what Harry does. Harry's a bus driver. He decides to give helpful sightseeing advice while travelling his regular route from the airport to the city. So that's his job. He's mindful that many of his passengers are from out of town. So Harry perceives his job as more than driving a bus. So in other words, because he's perceiving it more than driving a bus, he's using cognitive crafting. And by using his extensive local knowledge, Harry decides to use his extroverted personality to good effect. and he decides to add sightseeing to his primary task of driving a bus. So you can see that by Harry giving tips and sightseeing advice going from the airport, he's obviously looking at his job completely differently. He's not looking at it as a bus driver. He's seeing it as he's providing a value-added service, that is some sightseeing advice. And of course, he's adding sightseeing to his tasks. And of course, he's also task crafting as well. So these opportunities are everywhere. And people who are, put in a straitjacket with their job description often can't see opportunities to task craft or relational craft or cognitive craft. So therefore, by crafting your job differently, of course, there's no doubt that Harry would have far more, enthusiasm for his role on the basis that he's prepared to do what is essentially playing to his strengths. Now, where job crafting is extremely useful in your workplace, I think, if we're looking at where you might start, I think is where you've got special employment needs. So if you have a look at this, you've got older employees in your workplace that are probably close to retirement. Now, these employees undoubtedly have a whole lot of experience and knowledge, and really they could be crafting their jobs by mentoring some of the younger employees in their work areas. Now, they may not officially be a supervisor or even a workplace coach, but they could be encouraged to share their knowledge with young apprentices so that those young apprentices can get up to speed much quicker in the workplace. So I think a very much an untapped area of job crafting is with older employees. We've also got employees with disabilities or health problems in the workplace. And people who've got disabilities and health problems in the workplace are often hamstrung with their ability to do the job as it's described in the job description, which of course is a generic job description that probably works on the assumption that the person is able and healthy. But that's not always the case, is it? So a person who might have a disability would certainly be very open to the idea of job crafting so that, they can concentrate more attention in one area and not another because of that disability. So that's certainly an area to look at. And the third area that I think is very relevant is parents of young children, particularly female employees. I think any of us that have had young children would understand the incredibly high demands that those children have on our time, attention, and energy. And because of that, work-life balance becomes a critically important thing for a parent of young children. And in those cases, of course, job crafting is ideal because it gives, those parents an opportunity to be flexible in how they go about their work. So, for example, they might work from home 1 or 2 days a week, or, there might be flexibility around when they start or when they finish work. So I think those three groups are critically important when we look at special employment needs. Okay, now here's another example of job crafting, perhaps in the professional domain, just to give you a sense of how this works. Now, I'll read it through. Marilyn is an architect who specialises in designing offices for large companies. She goes out of her way to organise several informal meetings with her clients on a new office design project. So she goes in and she starts talking to some of the workforce that are in that office environment. And why is she doing that? Well, during those meetings, Marilyn, instead of looking at the current office layout, observes the way people are working and how they interact with one another. So after several visits, Marilyn changes the office designs based on her observations and her interactions with her clients. So in other words, she is using relational crafting by taking a little bit more time and effort to understand the nature of the work that's going on in that company, so that when she puts a design together for an office, it's going to be far more applicable for the circumstances of that company. So there might be, several breakout areas. There could be a central kitchenette. There might be some sort of private rooms. Offices might be, further back and so on. So she gets a better understanding. So when she's actually putting together her plans, she's got a better understanding. So you can see that in this case, Marilyn, and I think it's fair to say Marilyn probably sees her job more than just somebody who designs office layouts. She's obviously seeing her job as adding to the workplace. So there is some cognitive crafting going on there. The other thing she's doing, of course, is she is relational crafting, because she's, having several meetings with key people, and she's obviously observing how they work, so that her plans will be more applicable for that work environment. So the question now, ladies and gentlemen, is really, how do you actually design a job crafting program? So what do you actually have to do? Because it's not going to happen by accident, and it has to happen by design. And how it occurs is this. The first thing you've got to do, of course, is give people an understanding of what job crafting is. You have to give them some training to understand what job crafting looks like, and more importantly, how it applies to the work that people do. So people then need to understand the possibilities that are open to them as a team member or job holder in that workplace. So that's the first thing, because otherwise people don't understand the concept of job crafting. So basically everybody would go through some training. It doesn't have to be a huge, long, one-day workshop, but certainly several hours have to be put into the idea of job crafting, so that people can go and look at their own work. Stage 2 is that what you do is you have to record work activity. Now, why should we do that? So what's useful is that if you said to somebody, where could you possibly job craft, they may not be really confident to give you an answer, because they're not quite sure of their work and what they're doing. Because let's face it, if I asked you what you did last week, you'd probably be able to mention a couple of meetings and a few things, but it's probably not likely that you'd have a comprehensive understanding of what happened last week. So you have to actually record what you've done. So for 1 week, everybody in the workplace will record their work activity. And there's various bits of software you can use for that. And it's a bit of a pain in the neck, but I've attended a meeting. I'll just record that I've attended a meeting. I might record what the meeting was about. And then the next interval might be that I was working on a project. Perhaps I was completing a report, and so on and so forth. So by the end of the week, I've got a comprehensive record of how I've spent my time at work. Now, you might say, well, why should it only be a week? Well, the reality is that what happens in a week usually is fairly representative of what people do, unless it's an extraordinary week. And apart from anything else, it's a very onerous activity to record what you do, but you get people to do it for a week. So once they've got these records, the next step is to get them together. And I suggest you do this in teams. And you get people to actually reflect on what they did last week. And you ask them to consider how they might craft their job, having reflected on what they did last week. And remember, there are 3 dimensions. There is, of course, cognitive, relational, and task. And you ask people to look at their diary and to actually look at how they might craft their job to be more effective and cater for their own particular strengths and capabilities. And then I suggest you get them to share that with the other team members. And the reason for that is that if people decide not to do a task, or perhaps they might like to take up a task, or if they want to build a relationship or not build a relationship, that's certainly going to have an impact on other team members. So by reflecting on that and sharing that information in a team, we can make sure that, of course, people's aspirations around job crafting is not going to impede other people in the team. So once we've done stage 3, we're in a position now where the individual can sit down with their manager, their leader, and explain to the manager what they intend to do as a result of that exercise, steps 1, 2, and 3. And of course, the manager can certainly support them in that endeavor. So I think the interesting thing about job crafting is it comes from the individual job holder. The manager's job is really to support the job holder. It's not to enforce a change in job description, because the employee has to have the impetus to do that. Otherwise, it's hardly likely to be effective if the manager just simply says, I want you to do this task. I don't want you to do that. I want you to build good relationships up with those stakeholders. Whilst that might all be true, the reality is we want the impetus to come from the individual job holder. And that's broadly how you go about it. And that's a very effective system. Now, I just want to mention that every Friday, I have one of these sessions, and I know some of you are loyal supporters of this, but for those of you perhaps for the first time, just be aware that next week I've got another session coming up from the book Breaking the Proactive Paradox. Now, because we're running into Easter next week, I've decided to change the date to Tuesday, April 19, 2022. So, because I think I had it on Friday at 10 o'clock, and I believe that some will be on holidays or certainly not available. So please note the change of date, and you'll notice, of course, the time doesn't change. That's from 10 to 10:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time. And you can see the link at the bottom, just as you did today. You just have to go and click on that link, and it'll take you in and register you. What are we going to cover next week, or the week after, I should say? Super teams. Super teams are the teams of the future. And I want to talk about super teams. It's the next big thing. And I do really need to talk to you about how they work and what they entail. And I do cover this significantly in my book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox. And finally, if you'd like a copy of Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximizing Performance Through Empowerment, the book is normally $40, and I'm willing to give it to you for $30 today. And that includes postage. All you've got to do is send me an email message today to say you'd like a copy, and I will arrange that for you. So that's there for you if you choose to take that up. So folks, thank you for your time this morning. I hope you found that interesting, and hopefully that led to your understanding of what job crafting is, how it works, what are the dimensions of job crafting, and what special interest groups in your workplace would benefit most from job crafting. So thanks everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we catch you on Tuesday week for the session on super teams. Thanks everyone, all the best, and goodbye.